Directions. You will now be asked a question about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you will have 15 seconds to plan your response and 45 seconds to speak. Technology has significantly impacted the way students learn. Some people think that students should be allowed to use devices such as laptops and tablets during their classes, while others believe they are distracting and should not be permitted. What is your opinion? Use details and examples to support your answer. You may begin preparing now. You now have 45 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now. Directions. You will now read a short passage and then listen to a conversation on the same topic. You will then be asked a question about the passages. After you hear the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. You have 45 seconds to read the passage below. You may begin reading now. Now listen to a conversation about the same topic.
Did you hear about the new withdrawal limit?
Yeah, I did, and I think it's a really bad idea.
Why? They said it'll help students graduate on time.
Sure, but it doesn't take into account real-life situations. Sometimes you don't know how hard a course will be until you're in it. Last semester, I had to drop a statistics class because the professor's teaching style didn't work for me. The semester before that, I had to withdraw from a biology class because my work hours at the restaurant changed and I had no other choice. If I'm limited to just 3 withdrawals, what happens if I have another semester like that? It forces students to stick with classes that might hurt their GPAs.
Okay, but what about the point about professors? They said it reduces disruptions. Maybe the administration thinks withdrawals aren't fair to them.
That's an exaggeration. Most students don't drop courses just for fun. When they do, it's usually for a good reason. And if they are forced to stick with a class that doesn't suit them, they'll actually create more work for the professor, who'll need to give them special attention and help. If anything, this policy puts more pressure on students and just makes things even worse for professors. And what happens to a professor after a student withdraws from a class?
I don't know, actually.
Nothing happens, it's just one less name on their roster. I really hope the administration reconsiders.
Now answer the question. The man expresses his opinion about the new policy. Briefly summarize the policy. Then state his opinion about it and explain the reasons he gives for opposing it. You have 30 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 60 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now. Directions. You will now read a short passage and then listen to a lecture on the same topic. You will then be asked a question about the passages. After you hear the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. You have 45 seconds to read the passage below. You may begin reading now. Now listen to a lecture about this topic in a biology class.
I think it would be easier for you all to imagine this idea through a couple of real-world examples. First, imagine a small bird, like a robin, following a herd of cattle through a grassy field. As the cattle walk, they push through the grass, causing insects hiding there to jump or fly away in an attempt to avoid being trampled. The robin benefits from this movement because it can swoop in and catch the insects easily. This saves the robin a significant amount of energy. It doesn't have to search for food on its own or expend extra effort hunting. Meanwhile, the cattle are completely unaffected by the robin's presence. They're neither helping the bird intentionally nor being harmed. They simply go about grazing and moving through the field. This interaction demonstrates how commensalism allows one species to benefit while the other remains indifferent. Now let's consider barnacles and sea turtles. Barnacles are small marine organisms that often attach themselves to the shells of sea turtles. By doing so, the barnacles gain a free ride through the ocean, particularly to areas with nutrient-rich waters where they can feed on sea life like plankton. This attachment saves the barnacles a great deal of energy since they don't have to move themselves to new feeding grounds. The sea turtle, on the other hand, doesn't notice or care that the barnacles are there. The barnacles don't affect its ability to swim, find food, or survive. This is another example of commensalism. One species gains a distinct advantage while the other remains unaffected.
Using the examples from the talk, explain the concept of commensalism. You have 30 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 60 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now. Directions. You will now listen to part of a lecture. You will then be asked a question about it. After you hear the question, you will have 20 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak.
Let's talk about something that archaeologists find really interesting: how ancient objects like pottery are preserved over time. You might think that all pottery from thousands of years ago would be broken into tiny pieces or completely destroyed by now, but in some cases, it's remarkably well preserved. Why? It all depends on the environment. Today, we'll look at two environmental factors that help preserve ancient pottery. The first factor is dryness, or lack of moisture. Bacteria that cause decay can't survive without water, so pottery found in dry areas often stays in very good condition, pretty close to how it looked right after it was produced. For example, in the deserts of Egypt, archaeologists have found pottery in tombs that is thousands of years old. The dryness of the desert has not only kept the pottery from breaking down, but has also preserved the decorations and colors on it. Some of these designs are still as bright and detailed as they were when they were first made. Another factor to keep in mind is lack of oxygen. Bacteria destroy objects over time, but they need oxygen to grow, so pottery buried in places without oxygen can stay intact for a very long time. For instance, pottery found underwater at the very bottom of the sea is often well preserved. When pottery is buried in mud at the bottom of the ocean, the lack of oxygen in the environment prevents bacteria from growing and eating away at it. A good example is pottery discovered a few years ago in an ancient shipwreck in the Mediterranean Sea. Some of the vases found there were not only whole, but also looked almost new, even though they had been underwater for centuries.
Now answer the question. Using points and examples from the lecture, explain two environmental factors that help preserve ancient pottery. You have 20 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 60 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now.
I do believe that students should be allowed to use devices during their classes, with some restrictions. For example, in the US, kids as young as 8 years old are given a tablet to use for their classes. This device does not allow potentially dangerous sites such as videos, gaming, or even emails from outside websites. The students don't use any textbooks, only their tablets. All of their grades and assignments are on this device. There's even a word processing app for their written papers. However, educators must be careful because tablets can be used to distract students from their studies or to cheat. It's important that teachers have guidelines and consequences for students who do not use technology appropriately. But in the end, I believe the benefits outweigh the potential drawbacks. The university has announced that starting next semester, students will only be able to withdraw from a maximum of 3 courses in the undergraduate program. This is being done to ensure that students make careful choices when selecting courses and to improve graduation rates. The man in the conversation completely disagrees with this idea. Right off the bat, he says that this policy doesn't take into account real-life situations. He points out some examples from his own life, where he had to drop a class because it was too hard or his working hours changed. He also says that the idea that professors are being disrupted is really an exaggeration. There are really no negative consequences for teachers when a student withdraws. In reality, forcing students to stay in classes that they don't want to be in creates more disruptions for the professors because they will have to put in extra time and attention to help struggling students. One interesting thing I learned about commensalism is that one species benefits from another without causing harm or even affecting the other species. This plays a significant role in our ecological balance. In the lecture, the professor provides two crystal clear examples of this concept. In the first example, he explains how robins, a type of bird, follow herds of cattle as they graze and move through the grass. As the cattle move, insects fly up into the air to escape the cattle's steps. Then the robins fly down and eat the insects. This relationship provides the robins with the opportunity to find food and save energy, while the cattle remain unaware of their presence. The lecture goes on to give the example of barnacles and sea turtles. Barnacles are these tiny marine organisms that attach to turtle shells. By doing this, they get transported to nutrient-rich areas, while the turtle is oblivious to their presence on their shells. The listening passage talks about two environmental factors that help preserve ancient pottery. The first factor is essentially dryness or lack of moisture. The drier the climate, the longer the pottery is preserved. This is why, for example, many great discoveries have been made in Egypt, including massive amounts of pottery that still have extraordinarily vibrant colors and decorations on them. The second factor the professor talks about is oxygen. You see, bacteria destroys objects over time, but they need oxygen to grow. When pottery is found in places without oxygen, such as buried deep in mud or underwater, it's more likely to remain well preserved. The professor mentions a shipwreck discovered a few years ago in the Mediterranean Sea. Some vases look completely new even though they had been underwater for hundreds of years. This is how the lecture explains two factors that can preserve pottery.